Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thanks for stopping by. I look forward to interviewing Bob Collymore, Esquire, immediately after the release of Safaricom's first half earnings this afternoon. Keenly weighted, biggest capitalization stock here at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and therefore has a bellwether status. Got as high as 13.45 this year, last around 12.15. I think it's at the lower end of the trading range, and I think we'll see a pop because I expect a double-digit percent revenue gain and more. I'll put up a photograph of Bob and myself when I went to interview him in his office not too long ago, and the interview will be carried on a live feed, so once I get that link I'll put it out on Twitter. I still love my photograph of the flamingos I took from the sky as we came back from South Africa, and I don't know whether that was Lake Nakuru or Lake Naivasha, but anyway, I still love it. I thank Bonnie for the interview yesterday on CNBC Africa. That link is also on the website. My macro thoughts stay with dollar. As I said previously, the point I'm making is the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks. And that was on the 29th of September. On the 1st of September, I said the dollar has embarked on a meaningful and broad-based rally as investors anticipate a rate hike in the US ahead of all other developed economies. And on the 25th of August, I said the dollar has been punching higher. If things tip big, the dollar might soar. Home thoughts return to my weekend in Johannesburg in extremely fast cars. I took a photograph of all these cars lined up. We all had an instructor. We learned things about the vehicles that we would never have learned in a million years, and they're so extraordinarily advanced now. And that took me, the hashtag for Jaguar is good to be bad, and that made me think of Virilio's speed as the essence of the new 21st century. It is essential today for globalization to effect a split in primary reality by developing a stereo reality, made up on the one hand of the actual reality of immediate appearances and on the other of the virtual reality of media transappearances. I like this tweet from a fellow called Andy Snyder. Art is dangerous. Where it is chaste, it is not art. That's a quote from Picasso. And returning to speed and Paul Virilio, speed now illuminates reality, whereas light once gave objects of the world their shape. Political reflections. The First Lady, Dr. Christine Kaseba, is viewing the body of Zambia's late President Michael Sata at Mulungushi. I'll put an image I found via Yahoo. Sata's body was repatriated on Saturday to Lion State for a week in the capital Lusaka until a November 11 funeral in a graveyard reserved for heads of state. This is the second Zambian head of state to have died in office, I believe. Gunmen shoot dead 5 people in Saudi Arabia. This is state news. Unidentified gunmen shot dead 5 people in Saudi Arabia's eastern province late on Monday evening. The state news agency reported 9 people were wounded in the attack. As a group of citizens was leaving a building, 3 masked men opened fire at them with machine guns and pistols, the spokesman said, adding the incident was under investigation. And I think although Burkina Faso and Ouagadougou are really frontier parts of our world, I think the lesson from Ouagadougou is that things can unravel real quick. Or as Paul Virilio puts it again, I don't claim to define the situation, I try to reveal tendencies. And I think I've revealed a number of important ones. The question of speed. Speed is the essence of war. Technology is producer of speed. War is logistics, not strategy. War is preparation of means and no longer as battles, declaration of hostilities. And really, the way it unravelled, 100,000 in the street, sacked Parliament, and he was gone. Robert Hannigan, head of Britain's surveillance agency, has accused US technology companies of becoming the command and control networks of choice for terrorists. And I made this point about this new digital ecosystem and how effective some of these folks are at leveraging that. I couldn't resist this headline: Cows vote as Putin tightens grip on East Ukraine. The article is linked on Rich Wrap-Ups. It's from Bloomberg View. And on the 25th of August, I sort of borrowed the phrase WHO had used for Ebola when they were saying there were shadow zones. And I said Ukraine is a shadow zone. Currency markets, euro popping its nose over 125.09. You will recall we got as low as 124.44. That's an important chart level around there, actually. It breaks down there, we go to 103. Dollar index 87.14. I think we're going much higher. Japanese yen 7-year lows 113.60. Swissy 0.9641. Pound just below 160 at 159.93. Aussie 0.8721. Retail sales stronger than expected, plus 1.2% in September. Helping. No change in the interest rate as well. Had a bad session the session beforehand. India rupee 61.35. South Korean won has slipped to 1077.75. Rial 249.54. So that slipped as well. 250 being a multi-year low that we touched right after the election. Egyptian pound 715.51. South African rand 1105.10. I think that can go to about 12. Dollar index, I'm putting up a 3-month chart, just 0.2% away from its highest close since April 2009. Bloomberg dollar spot index declined 0.2% after touching 1088.07 yesterday, which was the highest close since April 2009. It's gained for 4 months in a row, and I think it's going a lot higher as the dollar emerges out of long entrenched price disequilibrium. Euro dollar 125.09 headed a lot lower in my view. My weekend piece was how the commodity super cycle is dead in the water. I'll just go through a couple of things. By rolling up QE3, the Fed is signaling that the US economy is now out of intensive care. In comparison, Japan and Europe are both easing and seeking to stimulate their economies. I talked about the stimulus coming from the oil price drop, which is estimated at over $1 trillion for the US consumer, and the US consumer constitutes 70% of the US economy. The commodity supercycle, I said, is now dead in its tracks. This is a major turning point and represents a major shift away from commodity producing countries and towards global consumers and consumer countries. I said gold and silver are now at 2010 lows, headed much lower. The unwinding of the supercycle will take gold below $1,000 an ounce. This major adjustment in the commodity market, and particularly oil, will see inflation fall sharply here in Kenya. Will give some welcome relief to the Kenyan consumer. I feel that the next move in interest rates here in Kenya will be lower in the first half of 2015, and this will underpin the economy. I'll put up a 5-day chart of crude oil. It's fallen sharply. It's actually trading below $78 last. I had an outlier target of $50 a barrel, and I think 60 is now given. Oil prices tumbled to their lowest point in more than 2 years after Saudi Arabia unexpectedly, I don't know why people didn't expect that, cut prices for crude sold to the US. I'll now put up a 6-month chart, and you can see how it's been an exponential price decline. BNP is saying petrodollars are leaving world markets for the first time in 18 years. This is the inflection point I was talking about. Energy exporting countries are set to pull their petrodollars out of world markets this year for the first time in almost 2 decades. Previously, they've had windfalls in Russia, Angola, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria. This year, however, oil producers will effectively import capital amounting to $7.6 billion. By comparison, they exported $60 billion in 2013, $248 billion in 2012, Highest was 511 billion in 2006 BNP. You will remember on the 13th of October I wrote a piece about who kneecapped oil. And if I might just go through that again. In fact, the oil market has always been very high beta, exhibits magnified price reactions to the demand and supply dynamic. Where markets are net short, price setting can be determined by the last buyer who is paying up in a net supply deficit scenario. And that's why you see those big price spikes around futures expiry, or you used to see them. I said this is a binary thing in a situation where there is a net surplus. The price setter can be those last sales transacted at deep discounts. The conditions are optimal for a complete washout. A blow-off bottom was a more earthy description in my time, down as far as $50 a barrel. Markets overshoot, crude oil does it big time, and any and every model needs to consider such a price outcome. The big game changer has been US crude output, which rose from 5.7 million barrels per day in 2011 to 8.88 million barrels a day in the first week of October. What I was saying, that is turn the market, and they've held it back, I think, and then flooded the market with it all. They didn't flood it, they stopped importing, made it available at home. Those imports were displaced. And essentially the global system is awash in oil, and the US has displaced a lot of imports, and those displaced barrels are being offered at fire sale prices. President Obama and his administration is the answer to my question, who kneecapped oil prices? And then I mentioned something that Donnellan had said as long ago as 2011, America's new energy posture allows us to engage from a position of greater strength. Increasing US energy supplies act as a cushion that helps reduce our vulnerability to global supply disruptions and price shocks. It also affords us a stronger hand in pursuing and implementing our international security goals. It's putting tremendous pressure on Russia, Venezuela. I said the US administration has turned price slasher, and like in Alfred Hitchcock's totemic movie Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. The US has flooded the oil market, and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear. It is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. The new price levels will have immediate, enormous geopolitical financial knock-on effects. My point is that Barack Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the aeroplane. He has control of all the instruments, and it has been a wild ride for the last few weeks, which would get a whole lot wilder. Gold was last trading at 1167.675. I think it's going below 1,000. I'll put up a graph that I got from Bloomberg, and they called it Gold's Wild Ride. Coming to Africa, people of Burkina Faso drive Blaise Compaoré from power. In 1987, and I've got a friend, Adrian, who actually came with us to Johannesburg, and he was in Ouagadougou in 1987. African revolutionary Thomas Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso, called on his fellow African heads of state to join him in refusing to pay debt they could not rationally owe to their former colonizers, calling it a form of neo-colonialism. He predicted that he would be dead before the next African Union conference if he alone refused to pay. Sankara was dead within the year, disemboweled, according to my friend Adrian. Yesterday, 27 years, disemboweled by Compaoré, yesterday, 27 years and 16 days after his death, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in Ouagadougou to demand the resignation of Sankara's assassin, President Blaise Compaoré. Protesters even lit the country's parliament building on fire to keep its members from amending the constitution to allow Compaoré to remain in power. Put up an image of Thomas Sankara and Blaise Compaoré. Quite a story, isn't it? Charles Obo has written in the M&G Africa Mail and Guardian Africa, Burkina Faso's Black Spring, there can be no African revolutions, only global ones. Here's why. What interested me was this. Early last week, an estimated 1 million protesters massed in a square in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. height of rallies against President Blaise Compaoré's bid to push through a parliamentary vote to amend the constitution and extend his rule. Few would have predicted that what would happen on Thursday. Angry demonstrators surged, torching Parliament, ransacking the national television headquarters, burning the homes of pro-government MPs, and setting fire to the ruling party headquarters in Burkina Faso's second city of Bobo-Dioulasso. Less than 24 hours later, Compaoré was fleeing to neighbouring Côte d'Ivoire. The fact that he fled next door is not an entirely positive signal, is it? Then returning to Ebola, The Economist is saying that the World Bank reckons that Ebola may cost Africa $33 billion, and I'll put up an image of that. And as I've said previously, the severity of Ebola is not about the absolute number of cases, it's about the speed of infections or the escape velocity. I think sometimes that point is missed. You know, viruses are non-linear and exponential when they get going. And furthermore, the rate of mutation of this virus is giving the tail risk a real bite. From Low AO, from a fellow on Twitter, and you'll have to go to the link on Rich Wrap-Ups. He took a photo of Benghazi and then was tweeting that almost half of Benghazi residents have been told to evacuate their homes. And it took me back to the 24th of October 2011 when I wrote that piece, Gaddafi's body in a freezer. What's the message? And I think there wasn't much of a message beyond it being put in a freezer. You know, I think what has come after Gaddafi, Saddam, has been infinitely worse, frankly, if one looks at it objectively. North Korea strengthened ties in East Africa. North Korea is seeking to extend its influence in East Africa following a series of meetings with governments in the region. Apparently they met with President Museveni as well. Interesting. South African all shares above 50,000 for the first time since September 23rd. It's up 8.141% year to date. Interestingly, total new vehicle sales rose 4.9% year on year. That follows an 11.5% year-on-year rise in new car sales in September. And I was down there this weekend. It looked a lot more vibrant than the bold GDP number would have you feel. South African tour operators have seen significant cancellations of Asian and US tours to the country over concerns that the Ebola virus may be spreading. That's according to Frost and Sullivan. Dollar Rand 11.0502, I think that goes towards 12. The Egyptian pound, just as it's been for a very long time, 715.53. The Egyptian stock market now at 9,437. It's up 39.147%. It's bouncing hard. Nigerian all share, however, continues to drift lower. It's now at March 20 lows, and it's down 9.644%. A suicide bomber blew himself up outside a Shia religious ceremony in northeastern Nigeria, killing about 20 people. A police officer at the scene who requested anonymity said it was a huge crowd and many of them were affected. This goes back to what I call the insurgency tail risk. I called it that on the 8th of September. And I was just talking about both the Al-Shabaab and the Boko Haram insurgencies and attacks. If you just look at the bold stats, they are infinitely higher in 22 this year than they were in any previous year. Tongue-in-cheek from the Pan-Arabian Inquirer, Al-Qaeda to acquire Boko Haram in $2.2 billion deal. Terror giant Al-Qaeda is said to be poised to buy a controlling stake in African militant group Boko Haram in a deal believed to be worth as much as $2.2 billion. The purchase is seen by experts as a clear attempt by Al-Qaeda to win back market share. It has lost to ISIS and the global jihad, with the emerging caliphate having dominated headlines over the past 6 months. It's an almost perfect match and should really put Al-Qaeda back on the map, commented KPMG analyst Charlie Valua-Price on the deal. Boko Haram has become one of Africa's fastest growing terrorist networks, holding the monopoly on extremism in Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger and Chad. Also, exact terms are yet to be revealed. Insiders claim the purchase will be made up as a mixture of stocks and shares and will make an instant paper billionaire of Abu Bakr Shakal, the Boko Haram leader who founded the group in his parents' garage in 2002 with Muhammad Yusuf later executed by Nigerian security forces. Many expect Boko Haram to eventually be merged with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which has offices in Algeria, Mali, Morocco, Mauritania and Libya, although such a move would see a potential power struggle between Shekau and Akim leader Abu Musab Abdel Wadud. A combined Boko Haram and AQIM would be indisputably the largest Islamic militant group in the whole of Africa, and would allow for significant economies of scale and cost-cutting, said Geraldine Velasquez, chief Africa terror expert at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And it could potentially line up a similar move for Al-Shabaab in the east, giving Al-Qaeda coast-to-coast control of the continent. Al-Qaeda shares jumped 23% on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange following the acquisition news. While the group is yet to comment on the acquisition, a source assured the Pan-Arabia Inquirer that it would be hoping to keep any Boko Haram redundancies to an absolute minimum. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 4.195% this year. Energy Global is writing a piece about how a significant drop in oil prices could damage sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Nigeria and Angola, and others, all of whom, by the way, have Equatorial Guinea, the Republic of Congo, Angola, Nigeria, Gabon and Chad, all earn more than 50% of total fiscal revenues from oil. The risks in these countries are highlighted by baseline 2014 budget oil assumptions of $104 a barrel, $98 a barrel, and $97 a barrel, all higher than the Brent spot price of $86 a barrel on the 17th of October, and it's even lower now. There is a report that the TPDC top brass risk jail over oil deals. This is Tanzania, where it looks as if Parliament is trying to force a declaration of PSAs signed between the government and various exploration companies. This morning I attended the KCB sustainability release at the Intercontinental, and I'll just give you a few tweets that I put out. Joshua said, "I am a strong believer that we sit here in Kenya at the epicenter." Achim Steiner of UNEP made a very articulate speech and said a number of things, one of which was ecological infrastructure is existential. Then he said 60% of the world's infrastructure in 2050 is yet to be built. And do you realize what we do in the next 20 years will decide the next 2,000 years? I came across this photograph on Bloomberg of bodies of 6 men who attempted a raid on the Kenya Navy base lie in a police truck in Mombasa. Investigations are underway to establish if the Mombasa attack is linked to Al-Shabaab or the Mombasa Republican Council. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the assault. Mombasa Republican Council, and I cannot believe they have this degree of sophistication, said, "We do not believe in violence. We've always addressed our issues through the courts." A near simultaneous attack occurred on a police barracks on the same day in the town of Malindi, which was also repelled. And my conclusions are the synchronicity of the attacks and the numbers involved are what's alarming, and speaks to an increased sophistication in the modus operandi, which is alarming as well. Malindi took me back to Gedi ruins, which I always seem to visit at dusk when it's so mysterious and it's just me and the monkeys. I'll put up 2 images, dusk, and then one where I tweeted Gedi, just myself and the monkeys. It really is it transfixes you, that place. A little bit surreal, a little bit nerve-wracking. Uchumi has acquired the Dar supermarket, a Dar es Salaam supermarket in Growth Drive. They have 37 stores, and they're looking to expand it, particularly in Tanzania. It's trading on a PE of 5.517, which is absurd. Kenya shilling is at its lowest levels this year, 89.601. I think those attacks didn't help. The Nairobi All Share is up 16.3922% year to date. NSE 20 up 5.42% year to date. If you want to look into any share, go to Rich Wrap Up, scroll down, and there's a link for you there as well. We saw good volume turnover yesterday. Obviously, Safaricom will be reporting after the market closes. Do follow me on Twitter if you want to listen in on that interview. More than happy. and we had some improvement. Safaricom firm 0.41% to close at 12.20. Kenya Airways rallied 3.3% to close at 9.40, and airline stocks globally rallying hard. Uchumi slumped 5.88% to close at 8. That is 11.11% below the rights offer price, and it's really a very loud signal. Scan Group was stronger, saw good volume. KCB firm 0.92%, well supported at these levels. And then finally EABL rallied sharply 2.142% to close at 286. Buyers outpaced sellers by a ratio of 2 versus 1 in the case of EABL. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I am grateful.